Fear.com is a 2002 horror movie about a kind of haunted website that is also a snuff site that is run by a serial killer. It's a mishmash of a lot of different ideas. I would say it is something like Pulse meets Seven and Silence of the Lambs meets The Ring. And maybe that's why it's so hated, but I think it's overhated. While it may be a mishmash of ideas of the time, I think it was a fun movie to watch. And it may be because, just by default, because it has cinematography, which a lot of mainstream movies nowadays simply do not have, it gets a leg up over something you would watch today. It stars Stephen Dorff and Natasha McElhone as the main characters, he's a law enforcement officer and she's some kind of scientist. I forget what she does exactly, but they're trying to figure out who is responsible for these murders, and it's this doctor guy who's doing snuff films in a nuclear silo, but one of his former victims is haunting the website. It's just a mishmash of a lot of ideas, but there's so many great things about early internet in this movie. It just makes me nostalgic. One of the funny things that I noticed was that the website in the movie is called fear.com.com because at the time they could not get fear.com, and they wanted whatever website they used in the film to point back to their official site for the movie. So I thought that was pretty hilarious that even back then somebody was squatting on the actual website fear.com and wouldn't sell it to them. I'm not sure what else to say about this one. I think it falls into a kind of so bad it's good situation, and I liked it. I think it's very overhated. I wouldn't say underrated because it's not the greatest movie, but I enjoyed it more than most people. Tailgate from 2019 is a Dutch horror thriller that to me is a throwback to some of the slashers of the 70s and 80s where the killer has kind of a gimmick, like think Driller Killer or Silent Night, Deadly Night or My Bloody Valentine. The thing about this movie is the killer doesn't have a backstory, so that's the only thing that's missing. Our killer is this Joe Biden looking motherfucker who's a sprayer of chemicals, and that's very much all we get from him is that he drives a white van and sprays some kind of chemicals. You don't know if it's weeds or pesticides or whatever, but the film opens with an opening kill, just like any other classic slasher or horror movie. And right off the bat, I was rooting for the killer because the first victim is a cyclist. We don't know what the cyclist did to draw the ire of our hero, but he gets taken out right away in a gruesome fashion. The main chunk of the movie is our killer, our hero, stalking a family who's on a road trip to visit the grandparents. They run afoul of the killer when they tailgate him on the highway and try to bully him off the road, basically. And he just stalks them and follows them and makes their lives miserable for the rest of the movie. Again, for a lot of the movie, I was rooting for the killer because it's a crusade of mine to maintain a safe following distance while driving, and I think a lot of us could benefit from that. Also, with the main family, the father is kind of an idiot jerk, so you're not exactly rooting for him. You just want the mother and the daughters to be safe. So I guess you're rooting for that a little bit. And luckily, this movie doesn't take itself too seriously. It is rather thrilling, but it's kind of stupid in the way that these characters interact and keep escalating. And I know that's one of the main points, like being macho and escalating between men when there's a situation that could be very easily resolved with an intelligent conversation. But as far as snappy, dumb little thrillers go, I got a lot of enjoyment out of this one. I do have it on DVD, and I'm going to keep it in the collection. The Devil's Candy from 2015 is a horror movie that was directed by Sean Byrne, which is a name that I didn't recognize when I watched the movie, but when I was logging this one on Letterboxd, I realized that he directed one of my favorite horror movies called The Loved Ones, and if you haven't seen that, you got to check it out. It's a really twisted and fucked up movie. This one is not as twisted and fucked up, and in fact, in the beginning, it's very slow and subdued. Not so much that it gets boring, but it's very low-key for the first 2/3 of the movie. This does lead to a sense of impending dread that leads to a crazy climax that had me cheering by the end. The story revolves around a Texas family played by Ethan Embry, Shiri Appleby, and Kiara Glasgow, who buy a house that is just this classic Texas horror movie house. It's just like the house in Texas Chainsaw or X and Pearl. And this one, unlike X and Pearl, was actually filmed on location in Texas. Our family is stalked by an unstoppable killer, much like the last movie I just talked about. This time around played by Pruitt Taylor Vince, who gives a really creepy performance, and he does that twitchy eye thing that he does in a lot of his roles that makes him extra creepy. And the kind of gimmick in this movie is that the father and daughter of this family are very much into heavy metal music. So there's this connection between heavy metal and the devil, as we see a lot of movies in the modern era where demons and Satan are a metaphor for something else. I read this one as the devil being a metaphor for creative energy. Our main character is a visual artist who, once they move into this house, goes into these crazy trances, and he does these really disturbing paintings that he doesn't even know that he's doing it, and time passes that he doesn't even realize has passed. Now, if I go any further into it, I'd probably be giving some stuff away, so I will just recommend this one if you want a fun, creepy rock and roll horror movie that really gets hectic and really goes for it in the climax of the film. Ladies Man is a 1931 pre-code film starring William Powell, Carole Lombard, and Kay Francis. I haven't watched a pre-code film in a little while, and this one really hammers home how trashy they could be. The movie's about William Powell's character, who is sleeping with a rich banker's wife. The wife gives William Powell jewelry, and that's how he supports himself by selling the jewelry. And wouldn't you know it, the woman's daughter also wants to shack up with William Powell's character. And then later on, Kay Francis's character feigns disinterest and then ends up falling in love with him. All of these women just throw themselves at him, and it's really slimy and gross. And again, pre-code films are a really fun rabbit hole to go down, but there's a reason the production code was put into place, and it's because these movies were really trashy and gross. And there are many hidden gems in those pre-code films, but this unfortunately is not one of them. I love William Powell, but I realize that most of the movies I've seen him in either have Myrna Loy in them or are more well-known films like My Man Godfrey. But he was in many pre-code films, and apparently he was in a ton of films with Kay Francis, who I'm not particularly familiar with. As far as Carole Lombard goes, I wouldn't say this is one of her more dignified roles. She plays a really pathetic woman who, again, is desperately in love with William Powell's character, as all of the women in this movie are. And there's one scene in particular where she plays it very well, but she's just drunk and pathetic and really embarrasses herself. And again, she does it well, but knowing that Carole Lombard died tragically young and thinking about her body of work is what it is, although she was very prolific while she lived, I wouldn't say this was one of the best movies she was ever in. There are a handful of rips of this movie on YouTube, so if you want to check it out, you can, but I would say unless you're a pre-code completionist, this isn't one of the highlights of the era. And that's going to do it for this week. I appreciate you watching to the end. If you like these short movie reviews, I have a whole playlist of them on my channel. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.